Sitting down at his computer, Jace connected his camera and started looking through the footage of his most recent exploration. He had a feeling his fan base would really love this video. He went through an abandoned factory that was like a time capsule from the 80s. The place even had a pretty retro computer that looked mostly intact. Jace debated taking one with him, but he figured he was already pushing his luck by breaking into the place. Trespassing could land him in some hot water if he ever got caught, but he thought that the probability of that happening was slim. He was careful about the places he explored, always taking the time to learn the layout, observe the area. He liked to think of himself as a professional in a field riddled with amateurs. Making videos and exploring abandoned places was his passion in life. Not only did he enjoy the thrill of going into these forgotten areas, he loved sharing them with his fans, giving them a chance to live in his world for a bit. He would never retire wealthy, but the videos paid the bills and allowed him to live the way he wanted. Free from the soul-crushing 9-to-5 that shattered dreams and took all your free time in exchange for money. Jace was living life the way it was meant to be lived. As he waited for his newest video to upload, he started going through his emails. Fans seemed to enjoy sending him messages, and he enjoyed interacting with them. Even though he stayed busy, he always tried to set out time to answer emails. These people took the time to watch his videos, so he figured the least he could do was respond to a few messages every day. However, tonight he had one message in his inbox that caught his attention. Something about the email subject line seemed familiar, like he had heard the words in passing. The subject line read, "Go find the Red Room in Oakcrest Apartments." The name Oakcrest gave him a chill, but he didn't know why. However, he was intrigued. He had a mystery to explore, so he opened the email. The email body was short and got straight to the point. Documentation of Oakcrest Apartments has eluded our organization. After watching a few of your videos, I can see you have a talent for this sort of thing. Capture footage of the apartments and the Red Room, and we will compensate you with 4 Bitcoins. If you find the Red Room, don't stay inside of it for long. Jace looked up the value of 4 Bitcoins, and it was a lot of money. However, how did he know they would really be able to pay? It was probably an online troll, but he decided to test the waters. Looking through his computer files, he found his old Bitcoin wallet address. He hadn't looked at it in a couple of years. It was sort of a craze in the early 2020s. Everyone thought cryptocurrency would be the future money of the world. It turned out the world was not ready for digital currency just yet. Jace quickly typed up an email that would see how serious this person was about getting footage of Oakcrest Apartments. Thank you for your interest in my videos. However, I don't normally do requests. If you'd like to make a donation to my wallet address located below, I'd be happy to consider exploring Oakcrest Apartments. The response was simple. If they really wanted him to explore Oakcrest Apartments, they could send him a donation. But he seriously doubted he would get anything from it. Most likely it was some kid who was bored on a computer. Now that the bet was called, the mysterious writer would have no choice but to fold and go away. It was getting late and he figured it was best to turn in for the night. However, before logging off, he did want to know a bit more about Oakcrest Apartments. For starters, was it even a real place? And if so, how large was the building? His friend JP was his trusted resource for information. He went to college with Joanna Price before dropping out after the second semester. They tried to date for a bit, but it just didn't work out. The two of them were better at being friends. Rather than trying to force the puzzle pieces together, they agreed to end the relationship before it got ugly. Now JP helped him with research on different areas to explore. She even came along on a few urban exploration trips. That is what he liked about JP. She had a bit of adventurer in her too. He sent a text to JP about Oakcrest Apartments. Jace assumed the search would come up with nothing, but the email just left him curious. It was like an itch that demanded to be scratched. Turning out the lights and laying down on the couch caused his eyes to grow heavy. The last thought he had before drifting off was the email. The mysterious writer said they were part of an organization. What organization needs footage of an abandoned apartment complex? And why are they offering such a large amount of money? 4 Bitcoin was worth tens of thousands of dollars. The only reasonable explanation was that it was an online troll, right? Waking up the next morning, he instinctively grabbed his cell phone off the coffee table. His mind was still waking up while his hands moved through the process of going through his phone's notifications on the screen. But one notification caused the groggy effects of sleep to leave his system immediately. It was a message from JP, and apparently she had spent last night looking up information on Oakcrest Apartments. Jace opened up the message and read the 2 sentences displayed on the screen. Pretty strange stuff, but here's what I could find. Weirdly, not a lot of information about this place. Attached to the message was a couple of links to articles from 2008 and a low-resolution image of a map. The map showed the place was pretty large. It looked like it had 4 stories and lots of units. It would take him hours to explore the entire thing. Then he moved on to the articles. They each had a couple of paragraphs about the building. In 2008, there was a gas leak that killed a dozen people. Part of the building exploded and caught the rest of it on fire. The owners of the apartments were already struggling to keep the place running, and the fire was the nail in the coffin. Without enough money to make the repairs, they allowed the bank to take possession of the property. No one wanted to deal with the mess, so it sat vacant for over a decade. If it was still owned by the bank, he doubted they would allow him to poke around. If he was going to explore the property, it would have to be as an uninvited guest. A few of the residents claimed that not everyone was accounted for at the property, that some people had gone missing after the fire. One quote from a resident left him feeling uneasy about the whole thing. The quote read, "Mr. Howl is still playing his games in the Red Room." No explanation of the meaning, just a quote included in the article in reference to the missing people. Maybe this article was the inspiration for the email. That reminded Jace that he should check his email. He was curious if the mysterious writer had a response to his donation request. He assumed it would just go unanswered, but part of the fun was seeing how this whole exchange would play out. When he opened his inbox, he was surprised to see a response. Opening the message nearly caused him to fall off his couch. "We have sent you 1 Bitcoin as a good faith payment. We will send you the other 3 when you capture footage of the Red Room at Oakcrest." Chase immediately opened up his crypto wallet to check the balance. It had to be a joke. No one would send thousands of dollars as a donation. But his balance reflected the information contained in the email. He now had 1.005 Bitcoin. Looking up the current exchange rate of 1 Bitcoin was worth $17,000. He had never had this much money in his life, and now this mysterious writer was offering him another 3 Bitcoin on top of it. His mind reeled with the possibility of what he could do with it. He could buy a truck that didn't have to be repaired every couple of weeks for starters. Maybe an actual bed instead of sleeping on his couch every night. New camera gear was certainly needed at this point. His GoPro was starting to show its age. Now he knew 2 things about this situation. The mysterious writer was certainly serious about the footage of Oakcrest, and they intended to make good on their promise. Jace knew he had to get the footage, and he was going to shoot it tonight. However, a couple of questions found themselves lodged into the back of his mind. Like a small thorn stuck in your palm that couldn't be removed. Why the whole cloak and dagger routine? Bitcoin was a strange way to pay someone for work. And most importantly, why are they paying so much money? It was just going into a building, shooting footage, and finding a specific room. A task that certainly didn't warrant a payment of nearly $70,000. Normally these kinds of questions would have stopped Jace and got him to evaluate the situation. But the pull of money was too great. It was not for the love of wealth. He had no taste for that sort of thing. Rather, it was for the freedom that money could provide him. He stuffed those doubts deep into his core and focused on his goal. Sending JP one simple question would get him started down the path towards his new adventure. Got the address for Oakcrest? Parking his truck next to Oakcrest caused his stomach to start doing somersaults. Maybe it was the broken street lamp or the fact that this part of town was so quiet, but this building really unnerved him. If it wasn't for the cash incentive, he would have taken a pass on it. It was 1 a.m. now, and he had circled the property a few times just to make sure it didn't have a security guard. Getting out of his truck, he turned on his recording equipment, grabbed his pack, and stretched his legs. It was a large building, so he figured he was in for a long night. He sent a text to JP letting her know that he was about to get started. Jace had gotten into the habit of doing that when exploring alone. Just in case he fell through a floor or got hurt, he wanted someone to know that he was out here. The rule they agreed on was that he would check in every hour. If she didn't hear from him after 2, then that meant he needed help. It was JP's idea, but the precaution had certainly grown on him. Okay, he whispered to himself. Let's find this red room. The front door was made of glass with steel mesh inside of it. He could see multiple impact points where someone had tried to kick it in. Of course, security glass does not give out easily, so the door was still intact. Turning on his flashlight, he peeked through the undamaged section of the window to look inside. Other than a few burn marks on the wall, the building appeared to be in good shape. Assuming it was locked, Jace pulled on the front door. To his surprise, it opened, which sent him staggering back a couple of steps. Well, that is strange, he said in a low whisper. Why have this heavy door reinforced with security glass if you're not even going to bother locking it? He gave a slight shrug and stepped inside. As soon as the door closed behind him, he heard a slight click. Turning around, he pushed on the door, but now it wouldn't open. Oh hell, it locked behind him. The door must lock by itself, and it happened not to be closed all the way. That was the only explanation that made sense to him. Well, he could find another way out. Normally he entered these kind of buildings through a window or balcony anyways. Being able to step through the front door was just a lucky bonus. He navigated down the entry hall, peeking into each room as he passed by it. Most of them held burnt or broken equipment. This must have been the front office back when people lived in the building. Opening the next set of doors revealed the main hallway. Sitting in the middle of it was an old TV with cords running up the wall and into the ceiling. Suddenly it turned on, filling the quiet hallway with a burst of static that nearly caused Jace to jump out of his skin. It was as if the TV had been positioned to welcome anyone who journeyed inside the building. Jace searched the TV for a way to turn it off, but it appeared to have been removed from the device. Then the static stopped, being replaced by a video. He stepped back to get a better view of the screen, listening as the message was broadcast down the echoey hallway.
Hello, I am
Mr. Howl.
Welcome to
Mr. Howl.
Hide and Seek.
You hide, and I'll find you. You better hide very well.
Escape and you get to live. If I catch you, I will hang your picture in my red room. Since I am such a good sport, I will give you a head start. Ready? Go.
A countdown started to play on the screen. This had to be a joke, right? But who would go through this much trouble to try and scare people? Then he heard a door slam shut behind him. The blast of noise had clearly come from the front office. The sound of heavy footfalls filled him with dread, reverberating through the entire building. Each thud caused the feeling of panic to build up just a bit more, and the sound was getting louder each passing moment. He wanted to believe this was a joke, but his instincts whispered the answer that his rational mind didn't want to hear. This was not a game. This was a contest for survival. Jace jumped over the TV and sprinted down the hall. He had no idea who was approaching, and he wasn't going to find out. Instead, he was going to get the hell out of here. He had found an apartment door that was opened, marked 3A. He rushed inside and closed the door, turning the deadbolt to lock it. Going over to the window, he started looking for a way to open it. The window had been broken out some time ago, but someone had installed a metal grate over it. Pulling with all of his might, he tried to remove the barrier, but he found it wouldn't budge. Jace walked into the bedroom and checked the other window, but found a similar security feature had been installed in there too. The apartment was falling apart, yet someone had taken the time to reinforce both windows. The reality of the situation was starting to set in for Jace. He was trapped inside of Oakcrest now. Looking for an answer, he spotted a small hole in the wall. It was just large enough that a person could squeeze through it. Getting down on the dusty floor, he peered into the dark hole, praying that this would be a method of escape. On the other side of the hole was another apartment, not an escape route outside. He cursed under his breath and got back up on his feet. Then he heard the thunderous sound of footfalls approaching the door. Moving as quietly as possible, Jace approached the peephole of the door and turned off his flashlight. At least he could figure out who was following him in this place. Looking through the cloudy peephole, he saw the man who was now hunting him. He stopped in front of the door, scanning the area while taking in deep, ragged breaths. The guy was massive, at least 6'5" and over 300 pounds. This maniac could have passed for a linebacker in the NFL. However, the most disturbing part was his attire. He wore a ghoulish mask that made him look like a monster out of a horror movie, and janitor coveralls that had strange brown spots covering the fabric. Jace could just barely make out the name on his shirt. Howl. This was Mr. Howl. Mr. Howl raised the axe he had in his other hand and tapped it on the door. Jace began to slowly back away from the barrier. Was it possible that he had heard him inside the apartment? The knob turned back and forth, however it failed to open. The deadbolt kept the door firmly in place. Jace stepped on a board that produced a light groan that echoed through the room. The noise caused him to hold his breath, hoping that Mr. Howl had not heard it from the other side of the door. A blast of crackling wood and splinters answered the question, the blade of the axe head barely peeking through the door frame. Running into the bedroom, Jace dove towards the hole in the wall. This would be his only chance to escape this encounter. Just behind him echoed the splintering noise of the door being removed from the frame. Mr. Howl was now in the apartment. As he crawled through the hole, he imagined the axe digging into his legs that were sticking outside of the wall. The image made him crawl a bit faster, pushing him through the small opening that pressed on his back and chest. It was a coin flip at this point. Either Mr. Howl would check the bedroom and catch him, or he would check the kitchen first, giving him enough time to crawl through the hole. Managing to grab the other side of the wall, Jace pulled himself the last few inches through the hole. A nail from the wall dragged across his side, cutting through his shirt and causing a few blood drops to paint on the wooden floor. The small laceration burned, but the spike of adrenaline dulled the pain. The only thing his mind could process now was the task of survival. Surveying injuries would come later. On the other side of the wall, he could hear Mr. Howl thrashing through the apartment, turning over every object in the room, looking for him. Jace moved through the apartment and went out the door. He was now back in the main hallway. Jogging away from the room, Jace found a stairwell and started to climb up. A plan of action was slowly starting to form in his panic-stricken mind. He didn't like the idea of getting away from the ground floor, but he needed to create some space from his attacker. All he had to do was find a place to hide and call for help. That had to be his best option at this point. Just as he was about to take the next step up the staircase, he froze in place. A dark blotch was on the ground, but the moonlight did not provide enough visibility to make out any details. Turning on his flashlight revealed just how near Jace had come to meeting his end. The last few steps had been removed, creating a pit in the floor. Shining his light down in the pit, he could see 4 or 5 sharpened metal poles, waiting to meet anyone who fell inside. Skewered on the center pole was a decomposing corpse, a look of horror permanently etched into its bony face. Jace turned back towards the main hall. He could hear the footfalls of Mr. Howl coming towards the staircase now. Guess he had figured out he was no longer in the apartment. He had two options: confront Mr. Howl or find a way around the pit. And if Jace was being honest with himself, he didn't like his chances against the axe-wielding maniac. Grabbing the handrail, Jace managed to use it to climb over the pit and onto the second floor. The guy chasing him was big and certainly strong, but lacked mobility. He doubted Mr. Howl would be able to cross this pit as easily. He ran down the hall to the second floor until he found a small room to dip inside. The room was filled with broken appliances. At one time, it was most likely a mini laundry room, but it now appeared to be used for housing broken junk. Jace sat down on the floor, leaning his back against a rusty dryer. He took in deep breaths to attempt to calm his nerves. As the adrenaline wore off, the sting of pain from his side started to remind him of its presence. Looking at the cut, he could see a few red blotches on his shirt. It looked like it was not a serious injury, but it still hurt like hell. Getting out his cell phone, Jace dialed the number for the police. His plan was simple: hold up in this room and wait for help. However, the phone failed to connect to an emergency responder. Checking his screen, he could see that he didn't have a signal. How was that possible? He was able to send a text to JP outside of the building. Then, all the puzzle pieces fell together in his mind. Of course that wouldn't work. Mr. Howl had prepared for this game. The door that locked behind him, the TV playing the message, the metal bars over all the windows, and the pit trap in the stairway. This was all done ahead of his arrival. It wouldn't be a stretch to assume that a cell phone jamming device had been installed as well. That meant if he was going to call for help, he was going to have to get out of the building. He was basically back to square one again, finding a way to escape Mr. Howl's game of hide and seek. Jace took a quick inventory of what he had brought with him in his pack. Pulling out his first aid kit, he took a moment to clean the cut on his side and put a bandage on it. Having it covered helped reduce the sting of the laceration. He had brought with him his recording equipment, a bottle of water, an energy bar, a pocket knife, and a small crowbar. He picked up both potential weapons in each hand, trying to decide which one would give him a better chance in a fight. The crowbar's weight felt a bit more reassuring than the knife. He put the knife back in his pocket and kept the crowbar out. He had serious doubts about his chances against Mr. Howl, but it was better than nothing. As he was putting his supplies back in his pack, a thought managed to surface in his panic-stricken brain. He was supposed to check in with JP in about 10 minutes, and if 2 hours went by without a call, she was going to send help. This thought caused his spirits to lift off of the cold concrete floor. All he had to do was wait it out, right? But would she call for help, or show up and try to help him? Oh hell, what if JP walked in here and got herself trapped too? That was something that he couldn't take a chance on. He had to find a way out and needed to do it quickly. Jace picked himself up off the ground and turned on his flashlight. The sudden illumination felt unnerving, like he was lighting a beacon to let that maniac know his location. But he was not going to find a way out if he couldn't see. It was a risk he was going to have to accept. Journeying out into the hallway, Jace looked down both ends to make sure the coast was clear. He let out a sigh of relief. The hallway was empty. He walked up the first apartment door in front of him and tried the knob. It was locked. Rather than risk making a lot of noise by prying it open with the crowbar, he moved over to the next door. Apartment B4's door had been knocked off its hinges, and a brownish paint covered the wall beside it. Jace came to the sudden realization that it was most likely not paint covering the wall. This thought sent a shiver down his spine, followed by a simple question. How long had Mr. Howl's game been allowed to play out here in Oakcrest? That question was one for another time. Right now he needed to focus on getting out. He walked inside the apartment and started checking the windows. Just like the first floor apartment, security bars had been installed on each escape route. This Mr. Howl was certainly meticulous about keeping people trapped inside. Sliding his crowbar under the frame, Jace pulled with all of his might. He attempted to remove the barrier from the window. However, it failed to budge. Clearly, it had been bolted into the brick wall. Rather than waste any more time trying to remove the bars, he decided to check the next apartment. Surely at some point he either forgot to install them or did a half-assed job putting them on the wall. He was only human after all. As he exited apartment B4, Jace caught a blur of movement on his left side. Instinctively, he stepped back to avoid whatever was coming at him. A lead pipe landed inches from his head, sending bits of the doorframe flying into the air. Charging into the room were two ragged men, one thin man carrying a metal pipe, the other a short, stocky guy brandishing a long piece of glass with a duct tape handle. He had no time to think about what was happening. All he could do was react to the unidentified threat. The thin man charged in and swung the metal pipe at Jace again. However, this time he had the crowbar out in front of him. The force of the strike landed mostly on the crowbar and caused the pipe to slide off to the side. A loud clang echoed down the hall from the deflected attack. The short man ran at Jace with the glass shard in hand. He attempted to drive it into his chest, but Jace turned away at the last moment. The stab from the glass shard landed in Jace's back instead of his chest. They both tumbled into the wall and lost their footing. The glass would have done some serious damage, but his backpack and gear stopped the makeshift blade. Jace tried to get free from the wall, but the short, stocky man had grabbed his back and wouldn't let go. Throwing his elbow behind him, caught the man's head and sent it bouncing into the wall. This caused him to release his grip and allowed Jace to try and escape from the encounter. However, the thin man was still in the way, readying another strike from the lead pipe. The swing of the pipe from the thin man was high and forced Jace to duck under it. He felt the metal bar drag across his hair, but he had luckily ducked just in time to avoid the blow. Clutching the crowbar tightly, he slammed it into the stomach of the thin man. The sound of his lungs expelling out a gust of air informed Jace that the crowbar had found its mark. Staggering back, the thin man choked on short, painful intakes of air, but was unable to catch his breath. The short, stocky man prepared to stab the glass shard into Jace's side. However, before he could execute the attack, he stepped on a small bit of tarp covering the floor. Metal jaws clamped on the short man's leg, driving an ear-piercing scream from his mouth. Blood began to flow freely from his leg and onto the floor. Then the thunderous footfalls of someone quickly approaching the room filled Jace with dread. Mr. Howl had heard the fighting and was on his way. The thin man dropped his pipe and ran out the door, leaving his short friend to deal with the bear trap on his leg. He attempted to pull the metal jaws open, but the short man was unable to summon the necessary strength to free himself from the contraption. Jace made the quick decision to hide instead of flee. He ran into a nearby coat closet and closed the door. His breath was quick and rapid, and he tried to slow it down, but his anxiety was forcing him to take in more oxygen. Jace could swear his heart was about to beat out of his chest as he heard Mr. Howl approaching the room. "No, please, don't," came a cry from the short man, followed by a strange noise that was repeated 3 times. It sounded like a mop being dropped in water, but it had a more viscous tone to it. Although he couldn't see it, Jace knew what the sound must be on the other side of the closet door. The wet noise was created from Mr. Howell's axe finding its victim. Jace heard something heavy being dragged out of the apartment, and then silence took over the room once again. He waited a few minutes before having the courage to open the door. The scene in the apartment was like something out of a nightmare. The walls and floor had been sprayed with blood, and a trail of fluid led into the hallway. Jace carefully stepped around the scene, grabbing his flashlight off the floor, and he slipped back into the hall. Taking a minute to collect his thoughts, he tried to think about what to do next. Fear was slowing his mental abilities, and he had trouble thinking about anything else. All he wanted to do was find a hiding spot and wait. It was better than facing whatever this madhouse had waiting for him. The only thing that made him resist this course of action was JP. She was one of the few people he cared about in this world. He couldn't let her get caught in this nightmare too. Everyone in his life looked at him like he was a screw-up. Jace failed out of college and couldn't hold down a normal job. But JP had always believed in him. There was no judgment in her brown eyes. If he survived tonight, he was going to tell her all of this and more. That idea of redemption waiting for him at the end filled him with a bit of strength, made the nightmare situation seem a bit more bearable. Jace managed to regain control of his heart rate and fight back the overwhelming terror he felt building up in his chest. The panic dissipated, being replaced by dull anxiousness. Once again, thinking about a plan of escape, he noticed the blood trail in the hallway. Instead of going towards the staircase, it went off to the side. It felt like a bad idea, but he needed to know what happened to the body. Maybe it would lead towards an escape route. Following the grim path led Jace to a narrow hallway that suddenly stopped in front of a metal door. It was an elevator. It was a way to escape. Of course, it made perfect sense. Mr. Howl would not risk trying to step around his own traps. He had a method to travel between all the floors. Jace hit the call button, but nothing happened. He pressed it a few more times, but the device refused to respond. No sound of a motor moving the elevator, just quiet indifference to the call button. "Elevator won't work unless you got the key," said a voice from behind him. Jace turned quickly, raising the crowbar in his hand, preparing himself for another fight. He expected to see the Thin Man again, but instead saw an older man covering himself with a dingy blanket. The gray hairs of his beard revealed his age, and his eyes seemed sorrowful, not angry. This calmed Jace, just a bit, but he kept the crowbar ready. "Do you have it?" asked Jace. The old man forced out a chuckle that caused him to start coughing uncontrollably. Clearly he had some kind of chest cold or possibly the early onset of pneumonia. The cold air of the dilapidated apartment was doing him no favors. "Afraid not, but I can help you get it. If you got some food to trade, I'll get the key," said the old man with a grin. Reaching inside of his bag, Jace threw him the energy bar. The old man caught it in his hands and quickly removed the wrapper, devouring the small meal in a couple of bites. He had stuffed the bar in his mouth faster than he could chew, causing an awkward moment of silence while they waited for him to swallow it. "How long have you been here?" asked Jace. The old man began counting on his hands before shrugging. "Maybe a couple of weeks. I sort of lost track of time after a while. Found a good hiding spot and even figured out how to get water, but there's not a lot of food in this place. Those guys who attacked you have been robbing people for a few days now, most likely looking for food too." Jace took a moment to absorb this new information. So he was likely one of many who had been trapped in Oakcrest. He guessed most of these people must have been homeless, looking for a warm place to sleep and then suddenly finding themselves trapped inside the building. It would also explain how this place had gone under the radar. The people that went missing most likely had no one looking for them. "Well, if you can get the key, we can both get out of here," said Jace. "That's going to be the tricky part. We got to lure Mr. Howl down here to get the key," replied the old man. "I'm not sure that's such a great idea," said Jace, the doubt in the plan being communicated in his tone. "I get that, but it's the only chance we got. Typically, if someone makes a lot of noise, Mr. Howl will come down from the 4th floor and try to get the person creating the disturbance. I've seen him come in and out of that elevator a few times now. Sometimes he remembers to take the key with him. Sometimes he leaves it in the elevator. If we get lucky, maybe he'll leave it in the elevator this time." "How do you know all this?" said Jace, a look of confusion painted on his face. The old man considered the question for a moment, then shrugged. "My body has pretty much given out, but I still got my mind. I'm good at staying hidden and observing what is happening. I figured out quickly that the only floor blocked off is the 4th, so I assume Mr. Howell's staying up there. I've had this plan kicking around for a while, but I can't pull it off. Even if I got to the 4th floor, I doubt I could make the climb down. But you seem young and in good shape. I bet you could pull it off, no problem." Okay, that makes sense. So what's next? Asked Jace. So here's the plan. I'll go make some noise in the hallway. You find a place and hide and wait for that elevator to come down. Once he goes after me, maybe he'll leave the keys in the elevator. I'm gonna have to try and get him real mad so that he'll forget to grab them. If you can use the elevator, take it to the 4th floor. See if you can get outside and get help for everyone else. Jace nodded in response. This idea sounded risky, but it was better than nothing. Oh, and one more thing. Be careful. This guy really loves to set traps. Wouldn't be surprised if he had a few on the 4th floor as well. And with that, the old man disappeared into the shadows. Jace looked around the hallway for somewhere to hide, but all he could find was a pile of garbage bags. He threw a couple to the side and buried himself in trash. It smelled terrible, but he doubted anyone would be able to see him. Pulling a bit of his shirt over his face helped keep the stench at bay. But he would need a 3-hour shower after this torturous night. Within a few moments of getting into position, the clang of a metal object banged against the wall and echoed through the apartment building. Clearly, the old man was holding up his end of the bargain. Now Jace just had to have faith in the plan. After a couple of minutes, the elevator motor began to hum its mechanical song. It worked. Mr. Howl was indeed coming. He hoped the old man had a plan to get away as well. Jace was not able to see the door, but he could hear the sound of it. It made a slight squeak as it came open. The hallway was now filled with light from the elevator door. The heavy footfalls of Mr. Howl echoed in the small space. Jace closed his eyes tightly, trying to keep his fight-or-flight reflex in check. He felt the vibration of the maniac march past him, but he did not dare open his eyes. Soon the footfalls began to decrease in volume, informing Jace that Mr. Howl was now deep into the apartment hallway. Throwing the trash off of him, Jace sprinted for the elevator door. This was it, the moment of truth. The call button would either work, allowing him a chance to escape, or Mr. Howl took the key out of the elevator and it would no longer be operational. His fate now rested in the plan of a sick, half-starved old man. Pressing the call button, Jace held his breath. A brilliant light erupted into the hallway, the elevator door giving a slight squeak as it opened. Jace jumped inside and pressed the button to the 4th floor. The door closed and the hum of the motor started carrying him away from the 2nd floor. Once again allowing himself to breathe, Jace felt the relief washing over him. It was the first time that something had gone right tonight. Checking his phone, he still didn't have a signal. Whatever was jamming the phones must have been installed all over the apartment building. Hanging in the elevator operational panel was a single key. It was strange that such a small object had so much control over his fate. When the door opened, he took the key out of the panel and walked down the dimly lit hall. This section of Oakcrest was completely different from what he had seen thus far. The lights had been turned on, and it appeared this floor had been restored to its previous state. The sudden change of environment almost caused Jace to lose focus, but he remembered what the old man had told him. "Be careful, Mr. Howl likes his traps," Jace whispered to himself. It was almost as if the words had manifested the reality in front of him. A tripwire ran along the floor, waiting for a foot to trigger the mechanism. Stepping over the wire, Jace followed it with his eyes to see what devious device was attached to it. In the ceiling was a shotgun barrel, pointed down at the ground. He shuddered to think what would have happened if he had overlooked it. Jace would have liked to have taken the gun with him, but the ceiling was high and impossible to reach. Instead of looking for something to stand on to recover the gun, he decided it'd be better to look for a way out. Now Jace was taking his time walking down the hall, moving cautiously and stopping every few feet to look for something out of the ordinary. The idea that a trap could be around any corner filled him with inescapable anxiety. All he wanted to do was run, but he knew that would be foolish. Turning the last bend, he saw an apartment door that was open. The light was bright, and the walls had been painted a dark red color. There could be no question about it. This was the Red Room he had been sent to find. Jace took a moment to inspect the doorframe for traps, but didn't spot any. Stepping inside the room made him feel uneasy. It was like getting to see inside the mind of Mr. Howl. Hanging from the ceiling was a multitude of necklaces and jewelry, an impossible amount for him to count. The wall was decorated with Polaroid pictures of his victims, displaying the bodies in chairs or other furniture. How long had he been playing this little game? It was clear that he had been doing this for years, maybe even longer. Was this why he was asked to find the Red Room? To document this collection of trophies and provide a record of missing people? Jace decided he could explore the why later. For now, he needed to find a way out. Stepping into the bedroom, he saw a desk with security monitors and a tool bench. Looking at the monitors revealed that he had cameras around the property and a few in select places inside the building. Sitting beside the monitors was a list in blue ink. The list was organized by age, gender, and build. 30 to 35, male, short. 18 to 24, female, tall. Most of the lists had been marked out, with only a handful remaining. This must have been how he kept track of who was still playing his game of hide and seek. Stepping away from the desk, Jace pulled the curtain away from the window. The sight nearly caused him to jump with joy. It was a window, no bars covering it. This was a way out. And best of all, it had a fire escape on the side of it. Squeak. Jace looked back and instantly recognized the sound. It was the elevator door opening. He had assumed taking the key would have disabled it. Maybe he was supposed to hit another button after taking the operator key? It wasn't like he knew how the hell it worked. However, none of this changed the situation. Mr. Howl was on the 4th floor again. He could feel his heavy footfalls causing the ground to vibrate, and they were approaching him quickly. Rather than worry about finding a way to open the window, Jace smashed it with his crowbar. The glass exploded from the impact, allowing a gust of air to enter the room. He ran the crowbar along the edge of the frame to remove any jagged glass before crawling outside. Mr. Howl charged into the bedroom, holding the axe high above his head. With a grunt, he launched the axe at Jace. The weapon tumbled end over end at him. He didn't have enough time to move or even react. He had been caught completely off guard. The handle hit part of the window frame, which reduced the force of the throw. However, the sharp blade of the axe head still tumbled into Jace's leg, creating a deep gash on his thigh. Rather than acknowledge the injury, Jace began to move down the fire escape. He tried to will his body to move faster down the stairs, but his wounded leg was slowing him down. A trail of blood was flowing down his pants leg and onto the metal of the steps. It was a grievous injury that would require a hospital visit soon. Mr. Howl stepped out of the window and onto the fire escape. His added weight caused the structure to shift as he began to chase down his victim. Looking back, he could see the large maniac catching up to him. The realization of what would happen next began to creep into his mind. Jace knew that he was not going to be able to outrun him at this pace. Turning around, he clutched the crowbar tightly in his hands and sent it flying at Mr. Howl's head. The metal weapon caught him on the cheek, causing a bit of his mask to break off his face. Under the mask, he could see a horrible scar. It looked like stretched skin with small trails running through it. It appeared to be a serious burn that had healed improperly. Jace attempted to draw the crowbar back for another strike, but it was stuck in place. Mr. Howl was holding it firmly in his hand, his grip an unbreakable metal vise. His free hand shot out like a viper at Jace, grabbing him by the throat. Instantly, he could feel his brain was being deprived of oxygen and blood. He feebly kicked at him with his unwounded leg, but it had little effect. All it managed to do was cause Mr. Howl to shift his weight just a bit. Jace attempted to break free again, but he was simply overmatched by his strength and weight. The tendrils of unconsciousness threatened to take Jace away, his vision narrowing each passing second. He made one last attempt to kick away his attacker, launching his foot at Mr. Howl's solar plex. It failed to break his clutch, but the blow caused him to shift his weight again. Then a sharp metal boom filled the night sky. The fire escape detached from the side of the apartment building, and suddenly he was falling. Smashing into the ground caused his body to explode with pain. Jace tried to cry out, but there was no air in his lungs to scream. Unable to move, he laid on the cold ground for a couple of minutes. Attempting to move his right arm to get his cell phone caused a sharp pain to shoot up his shoulder. Turning his head, he could see Mr. Howl laying on the ground as well. The sight of him gave Jace another adrenaline spike, one final push to keep himself alive. He used his left arm to get himself back up on his feet. His stance was uneven and shaky, but he found that he was still able to move. Now that he was standing, he could see that the metal crowbar had been driven through Mr. Howell's chest, falling on top of it at just the right angle. Even this monster was certainly not surviving from that wound. Something about the injury seemed fitting, like it was universal justice at work. It reminded him of the pit trap on the staircase. "Now you know how it feels," said Jace with a whisper. His voice struggled to form the words after nearly having his throat crushed. He hobbled towards the road, then he saw her. JP was standing outside, a look of utter bewilderment painted on her face. She ran towards him, catching Jace in her arms as he fell over onto her. "Are you okay?" said JP. The panic built in her voice as she asked the question. "No, but don't go inside that building, okay?" said Jace meekly. "I won't, but what the hell happened?" asked JP. She then got out her phone and began to dial 911. Jace thought about the question for a moment before replying, "I won. I beat Mr. Howell's little game." Ghastly here. If you enjoyed this story, consider giving the video a like. It's the best, and it's a free method to support my work. I always appreciate anyone who's willing to subscribe, and I'll do my best to keep the stories coming. Now, I assume if you've made it to this point in the video, then you enjoy the style that's on this channel. I really like hearing your feedback, so let me know in the comments the types of stories you like to hear. As always, I appreciate your support, and until next time, my friends.